Hello, everyone. My name is Tina Ruggieri. I am the assistant curator at the Abrams Engel Institute for the Visual Arts, located at the University of Alabama at Birmingham's campus. I'm excited to be here today with artist Erin Loree. Erin was born in 1988 in Kingston, Ontario. She graduated in 2012 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Ontario College of Art and Design, University in Toronto. And she also received a Certificate of Advanced Visual Studies from OCAD's Florence program. Erin's work is abstract in nature, and her paintings are bold and experiential. She is interested in the transformation of the image and how the work's meaning shift throughout her process. She facilitates an experience for the viewer where multiple truths exist simultaneously within one work. Erin has had exhibitions at galleries and museums such as Tom Thompson Art Gallery in Ontario, Peter Robertson Gallery in Alberta, The Yard in Brooklyn, New York, and Stephen House in Brooklyn, New York, and that is just to name a few. Erin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah. So first, I want to ask about your most recent exhibition at Tom Thompson Art Gallery titled The Swirl. Can you walk us through the process of how you came up with the idea for the exhibition and also the inspiration for the title?
Sure. I'll just say that it was meaningful on a number of levels. First, it was my first exhibition at a public art gallery, which in itself was a much grander production than anything I've been used to in the past. So Heather McLeese, the curator of contemporary art at the Tom, invited me to come look at the gallery's vault last year in June. Mm-hmm. So I went to the space, into this secret layer filled with paintings, drawings, artifacts, prints of a number of historic and contemporary Canadian artists, including the Group of Seven and Tom Thompson, whom the gallery is named after. Mm-hmm. And so what we did was, first, I went to the vault and intuitively picked out a number of paintings. And then I sat with them for about a month or two and just started writing about them individually and as a group, making connections between them. And slowly things started to come together. Pieces of the puzzle started to fit. And around that time, I was reading an essay by Roald Nasgard. He's a brilliant writer and art critic in Canada. And he wrote an essay called Rendering the God Spirit. And it was from the accompanying text for the Mystical Landscapes exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ontario a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And in the essay, he talked about Emily Carr, who she was associated with the Group of Seven, but wasn't an official member. She encountered the Group of Seven's work for the first time and I believe it was 1927. And she talked about their impact on her. And it was like they were messengers from a god that she had been searching for this whole time. So she described Arthur Lismer's work as swirling and sweeping on, and Lauren Harris's work as moving into serene and uplifted places. Mm-hmm. So I started to think about this idea of the swirl and what something about it just hooked me. Yeah. And what it meant. And so my interpretation of it was that the swirl is a state of being. Mm-hmm. And the show for me, the works that I made in response to the pieces from the collection that were also exhibited in the show, were exploring what it meant to reside to be within the swirl and above the swirl simultaneously. So chaos existing at one level and harmony at another. Mm-hmm. So you can see right here, all of the, most of the pieces from the collection that were in the show were shown in a salon style wall. Mm-hmm. And each piece to me represented, which I'll have to talk about because it's kind of multifaceted. Yeah. A piece of the journey moving from, say, darkness to light. So I was thinking about, first of all, it was a really long process to narrow down the works. So I chose, artifacts, prints, drawings, and paintings, obviously, from a number of artists that had been my art heroes, like David Milne, Emily Carr, Lauren Harris, Arthur Lismer, and Tom Thompson. And basically, I wanted to show different fragments of the journey. So whether it was referenced in the title or the imagery or the relationships between pieces together on the wall. And then I'm not sure if you can see it. So, okay. So we also
I was going to ask you about the monarch. So
yeah,
good
okay,
opportunity.
Yes. Okay. So the monarch, the butterfly is a symbol of transformation, renewal, rebirth, and it's been a huge, significant creature in my life. And I had just recently watched a documentary from 2009 called "The Incredible Journey of the Butterflies," which described the phenomenal migration path of the monarchs from North America to Mexico every winter. And it talked about how they have to, first of all, no one really knows still to this day what draws them there and how they get there. If it's like an inner compass or generational, like cellular memory or something. But so they have to cross scorching hot deserts, mountain ranges, bodies of water with no land in sight. And they're like the most unlikely creature to make this journey, which is upward of 3,000 miles. So I just thought about this journey of the butterflies as something of immense faith and persistence, perseverance, and it's cyclical and it's multi-generational. So we spoke with, I forget his position, but at the Royal Ontario Museum, the man who's in charge of the insect specimens. So I got to go into that vault.
Oh, wow.
I know, it was fantastic, and he loves his job. And so, he had a lot of stories to tell me, not just about monarchs, but about other insects as well. And it was really special. So I got to choose a number of monarchs, two of which actually are, pardon?
Sorry, I was going to say, so this was like a multi-institutional exhibition that you put together.
Yeah. Yes. And it all came together piece by piece. So one, exactly. So two of the butterflies are tagged by Fred Urquhart, who he was a Canadian zoologist. And he and his wife discovered the migratory path in the 70s.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it was really, it's really special that they're in there. So in the installation, you can see the salon style wall on the one side of the gallery. And then in the middle of the gallery is the case full of monarch butterflies, which appear to be in flight. And then mirroring on the other side is a giant painting. It's 9 feet by 15 feet called The Swirl right here, which also,
I'm sure this one is just super immersive, because the size itself, you can't really, unless you're standing in front of it, you just can't get a sense of just how enormous it is.
Totally. It was definitely, I'm really comfortable working on a large scale normally, but this was just a little bit bigger than I had ever worked, and I had to set up scaffolding to do it. So the process of making it felt very like stop and go, very fragmented. And when I'm making a large painting, like normally when I make works, it's all in one shot, it's wet into wet. But with the larger paintings, I have to do a wet into wet section and then a wet into wet section, and somehow find a way to connect them all to have them appear as if they came into being at once. And this one, just because of the nature of the size, really did feel like a really challenging fragmented journey for me. And it was and I didn't plan this piece, which made it even more challenging. The only thing that I really had an intention of was painting that waterfall, which I wanted to have sort of function as like the backdrop or the stage for other abstract painterly marks to happen from.
So I know that the process of making your work is important. Can you go ahead and walk us a little bit through that? And
totally.
Maybe how it changed with this work?
Yeah. So painting for me is really mysterious. Like something that works one day doesn't work the next day, and that's what keeps me coming back to the studio. So it's very elusive in a way. And I will say that I'm a monogamous painter. I like to work on one at a time. So I really like to have a deep love affair or conversation with one painting at a time. Like, I've tried to work on a number of pieces at once, and I found that they just they became a bit diluted, and they also ended up looking really similar because I was using the same palette, and obviously that's okay depending on my intention, but I prefer to have each painting functioning as its own universe. So I do want it to be self-contained, but at the same time, each painting generates the next painting, so they're all connected through a thread that way. And questions that arise in one painting, I get to explore in the next one. Like I said, I work normally wet into wet. So there's a lot of, I use all kinds of tools like paint brushes, synthetic and not synthetic, cardboard, screen printing squeegees, homemade squeegees, cardboard, like on palette knives, whatever I can find that can move, apply paint and remove paint. So I like to work on a rigid surface because a lot of my process is additive but also reductive, and I tend to dig into the surface to remove paint and allow the stained surface to, or the white of the panel at least, to shine through the stained colors on the surface. And ambiguity is very important. I really want the viewer to have the same experience that I'm having when I look at my own work, which is something different every time I see it, because you're bringing your own experiences in that moment and from everything from your past to this one painting, and the meaning and perception of it changes every time. And so I really want the paintings to not be too legible and easily understood. I want them to unfold slowly over time, and I want them to have like an immediacy and an intimacy. So I want the image and the color to really to draw you in, and then I want the handling of the material to kind of keep you there, keep you interested. So yeah. This piece.
And I was gonna say that makes sense when you think about the wet into wet, because that's the only way you would get, like on this painting, for example, the far left, you have those reds, yellows, and blues all mixed in together, and that's really the only way you're going to achieve that goal. I guess unless you painstakingly, do it like one color at a time, but you still wouldn't have that quality that you get when you go wet to wet.
Absolutely.
So these are dated for this year. So let's talk about like some recent developments in your work, but also maybe what you've been working on during quarantine.
Absolutely. Okay, so these paintings are the same size. They're both made from this year, within a couple of months of each other. But the piece on the right is actually for the first time, I'm starting to paint over top of old paintings that I thought were finished, which I now realize weren't finished, and they just needed to be continued, but I had to wait for the right time. So I approach a lot of my paintings quite differently, and the painting on the left is called Poet. And okay, so this was one of the first pieces where I was exploring this idea. So I love that we are all living things are emanating electromagnetic frequencies at all times. And if you take the heart, for example, it's like the strongest electromagnetic frequency that emanates from the body. And so we're literally immersed in each other's heartbeats at all times. So there's this, like, we're thinking, sometimes we think that we're individual autonomous beings, but the fact of the matter is, on some level, some energetic level or telepathic level, we're communicating with each other. And so I wanted to find a way to visually express this idea of these ripples of energy or light emanating from a central form or central section And so I also want my paintings to feel as if have a glowing light from within them. I always think of light as synonymous with life. And so in the piece on the left, there's a lot of, I did one layer of these gradients. You can see a green, brown, or rusty orange, yellow, white on the background. And then I layered thick paint over top of that and started removing a lot of different sections and then wiping it away. So there's a lot of different applications to remove paint on this piece. And I was also thinking like a poet and an artist, like their work having this impact and rippling out in ways that we can't see. That's why I called it Poet.
Well, that's beautiful. And I mean, in just describing the heartbeats and these I mean, that in itself is very poetic. So it's very interesting to hear what you're thinking about and how that reflects into your work. It's very
yeah. I should totally mention that I don't work with any references around me at all. So it's just the work comes from things I'm reading or watching or looking at or thinking about at the time. And so when I start a series of paintings, I'm starting with an empty room. So the first few paintings are really hard to get into because I had nothing around me to inform them. So as I make the first few, then there's something to work with, and then they start informing the next. But it's like a really slow start to a series that I have. And so this piece on the right, called Receive, this is something that I've been working on during quarantine for the first year and a half, month and a half of quarantine.
I know, it feels like it's been a year and a half.
Yeah. All right. For the first month and a half of quarantine, I didn't make any oil paintings at all, really. Maybe like one or two, but I felt like a serious scarcity of materials. I use a lot of paint, obviously, and all the art supply stores closed down, and all of the colors that I would normally work with were out of stock, or if they were in stock, would take a month to get to me. So I started like asking myself a lot of really hard questions, like, how am I being wasteful? How can I be resourceful in the studio? Why do I need to use all this material, and why do I need to make a painting right now? And I felt like I didn't want to make an oil painting unless I had some real reason to. So I just did a lot of watercolors, which was very therapeutic, and it was much more of a meditative process, which is what I needed at the time. And so I was sitting in the studio one day, and like I wanted to make a painting, but like I said, I didn't want to waste any materials. And then I just started pulling out all of these old paintings that I really would have thrown in the garbage, or, I don't know what I would have done with them, stored them indefinitely. And because they were throwaways to me anyways, there's so much more of a willingness to take a risk with them, which is something that I'm always trying to do anyways, but it was just very evident in this specific process that there was nothing to lose. And so I've always been really I've had an aversion to painting on textured surfaces. I normally paint on really smooth, wet sanded panels. But something just clicked this time, and I started seeing the value in the slow building of something. And then I started seeing my entire practice in a new light. So these older paintings that I thought they were finished, are coming back into my life. They're teaching me something. So there's this, now I'm seeing that it's much more cyclical than I thought. And there are threads that weave in and out of my practice. And it's also amazing to know now that I don't have to get it right the first time.
I can relate to that statement. I have a tendency to want to do everything right the first time. But it sounds like, in a way, even though obviously quarantine has not always been positive, but you were able to spend this time and be very reflective on your practice, and maybe in a way have a little bit of a breakthrough with your own work.
Totally. I'm not the only one. I have almost every artist I've talked to has had a similar experience. And like, it's like in the beginning, you know, the stress and the chaos of everything sort of suppressed creativity. And then at some point, something new emerges. And also, you know, being pulled out of the hustle and all these deadlines are now non-existent because everything's been canceled. It's like we get a chance to return to this more like childlike, curious way of creating something. And it's been really special. So I'm really grateful for this. I don't think this would have happened.
Well, that's actually really wonderful to hear. And I mean, honestly, it's really nice to hear, because I have spoken to several artists that have had their own breaks. Like you said, many people have had breakthroughs or have looked at their practice differently or created a new series, or even though in the beginning it was kind of tough to get your creative juices going, but then somewhere, you know, artists, y'all have this deep need to create. That's just what makes you an artist. And so everybody's been able to pull through and make some really incredible work.
Absolutely.
Something people always want to know is just how you became interested in art. So I want to kind of take a step back and just start, maybe, where did this interest in becoming an artist or being interested in art come from?
Sure. I mean, I think becoming an artist happens in a lot of different ways for people. For me, it was just, I was born that way. It just is a classic case of, like, as soon as I could hold a crayon, I was making art. And I'm lucky that it was really nurtured in me. My dad is an incredible artist and musician. And my mom's also very creative and musical. So as well as a lot of my aunts and uncles. And cousins, but
so it's in the family.
And my dad, actually, I just talked to him the other day because he's moving across the country next month. So we were having like a reconnecting visit, and he was telling me that when I was younger, my mom was at work, and he just played gigs at night. So he spent every day with me as a young girl, and we would draw together on pieces of Bristol board every day for hours.
Oh, wow.
Every day. And he taught me how to observe things around me and to break them down into simple shapes and translate them into my own work. And he also is super hilarious, and he was always drawing a lot of like comics and cartoons. So he taught me how to be more inventive in a different way as well. So I think that so that was definitely nurtured in me from the beginning. And I spent many years until my last year of university doing realistic figurative work.
Oh, wow.
What happened was so for the 2 years leading up to the transition to this work, I felt like an extreme restlessness. Like, it was like I was so dissatisfied with my work, but I didn't know what to do, and I was like dipping my toes in abstraction, but always combining the figure in the work in some way. And I just couldn't let go to working with, like, using an image and a reference, and I was really attached to the image and making it look exactly like the source material. So in that sense, there was no room for spontaneity or chance or discovery in the process. It was only about execution. And
is that why you don't typically have source material around you now? Is because that was part of an old process?
Yeah, and I'm sure, like, I might come back to it. Like, everything I do now is just, who knows what's gonna happen. Like, I really believe that I'm really open to whatever calls to me. And so far, every time I try something other than painting, it just reinforces the fact that I want to paint. So it's but so what happened was like a few days before my final year at OCAD, which is your most important year of your undergrad, obviously, because you're building a body of work based on research, and it's very self-directed. So a few days before that, I broke my foot, my third metatarsal, and I had crutches for the whole first semester because my bone just didn't heal.
Oh, that sounds
so. I mean, again, it's like, in a way, it's like the quarantine. It was a huge gift in disguise, because I had never slowed down or taken a pause in my life long enough to really, I don't know, confront aspects of myself that I had been running away from. And so I had to really surrender to the experience. Like, you know, I couldn't, everything that I had thought I was going to do that year just went right out the window. I couldn't build my own strainers or stretchers, stretch my own canvas. I couldn't gesso myself. I couldn't stand up to paint, carry a coffee, buy art supplies. I literally had to rely on help for everything, which was, you know, it was really tough. But it was amazing because I started seeing, just from my own perspective of being physically limited for 4 months, like I started seeing that around me everywhere. So I started having this like understanding of like just what I hadn't noticed in the world was going on. And I think that over the course of the 4 months, a lot of tension had just built up, and I started making a lot of these small self-portraits, like dozens and dozens and dozens of them, and they started to loosen up a lot. And I was looking at artists like George Condo, Cecily Brown, Auerbach, like Marlene Dumas, and because I was also in a pretty dark place, and looking at artists that were trying to capture the essence of a person rather than the likeness of someone.
Yeah.
And then as soon as my cast came off, I feel like the same week I just decided to give up reference photos. And I just dove into color in a way that I'd never done before. I think I was afraid of paint and color before that. And from that point on, it became about the process of making something and the uncertainty of the work, and just sort of finding value in the unknown. And it was fun from that day on. I had never had fun before. So like, I'm really grateful for that.
Sometimes it's because we live in such a fast-paced world, like everything is go, go, go. And I think that's been one of the positives of COVID. And it sounds like that's, you're saying, is one of the positives of when you broke your foot, is that it's forcing you to slow down and to observe and to be more mindful of what you're doing. And that's something that I've learned during COVID as well, is we don't have to be go, go, go all the time. We can take a step back, take a breather, and really think. And it sounds like that has been the breaking point for you. So I know that you just mentioned color. And so a lot of your work is very vibrant with rich, beautiful colors. So I just want you to maybe touch a little bit about your vibrant color palettes, because they are just, let's go to like this one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay. First of all, I have a lot to say about this painting besides the color, but so for me, form follows color. So whenever I feel stagnant in my practice, or I feel like the compositions or imagery is becoming very predictable, like I will go out and buy different colors that I've never used together before. And it always changes something, and something unpredictable always happens when I change the color palette. So I'm always using color to create tension and a sense of vibration and energy. And color is something that I really love to explore. So I also have I always have small panels lying around where I will use the leftover paint that I've scraped off of paintings, and then I'll create these like in-between paintings with these sort of muddier, more muted color palettes, which is also like, it's just a way to challenge me to, you know, work with materials that I'm not used to working with. And like I said, that always change. That's one of them.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm so I also made a body of work a couple of years ago called Shadow of a Hole. And so at a certain point in my practice, I felt like I might have been using color as a crutch, and I wanted to see if I could create paintings that, you know, elicited an emotional response without color and its associations. And so I did a series of monochromatic paintings using a chromatic black that I mixed plus white. I never measured the different colors that I was using to mix with the black. So when I painted, the painting had its own hue. So that each piece had a different hue and temperature, which I found really interesting. Like some were warmer, some were cooler. And then it became about, how do I create a compelling painting through image and surface, and the handling of material alone without color, and working with a greater range of value. But then it just reinforced my desire to use color. So, but I do think it's always really, I mean, it's important to me to create challenges or constraints within my practice that help me to grow within those limitations. And so this piece right here called Fantasia 2 is from another series where I introduced some constraints, which was I made a series of pairs and trios of paintings. So an eternal struggle that I have is whether I should be planning my paintings more or I should just totally work intuitively. And so I wanted to make a series where I investigated the relative benefits of planning and not planning. And so the first painting in the pair or the trio was totally unplanned. And then the second painting at first was an attempt to replicate the first one, which was a really interesting exercise because I don't really know how I'm making a painting while I'm making it, and I'm not, analyzing, this stroke came first, that stroke came second. So then when I went to go make the second one, I really had to break it down in my mind first. And then, so what was interesting was just what happened between the two paintings. It wasn't the final outcome. And it was always the first painting that was more successful than the second painting, except for in this pair. So this is the second piece of a large pair. So it's 5 feet by 13 feet long.
It's massive.
Yeah, I know. So, okay, the way that I typically, I'm veering off topic about the color, but
no, it's okay. We're kind of getting into the idea of the series, and so I find that which I want you to touch on a little bit.
Totally. So I also made a series of, I think maybe there were 4 or 5 paintings in that body of work where I played with how I can translate the feeling of one painting in different scales. So I made one piece that was like 3 by 3.5 feet, and then I moved up to like up in scale, and then down in scale, and then really up in scale. So I shifted around a lot, non-linearly. The paintings were called Peace of Mind on a Mountainside. So I just wanted to see if I could translate that feeling of like standing on top of a mountain or a lookout, and just that this moment of relief and calm on different scales. And also at this time of making this body of work, I discovered that, which maybe I should have known, but I didn't know, that Matisse had also started working serially when he turned 30. And that was the same year that I started making these works as well. So, and he never intended for his works to be shown together. He was always just searching for different visual solutions to the same problem, but also trying to get to a deeper truth in the painting. But again, they were shown together just, in recent years. But so I just thought that was really interesting that, there's this collapsing of time. We're working with the same materials, and we're inevitably going to encounter the same challenges and ask the same questions. And so I felt like it was a moment of reassurance for me. I'm on the right path in my career it was really nice.
So you had started to say that this painting that we're looking at on the screen, Fantasia 2, was the more successful painting from this series. Can you explain to us why?
It might have just been, well, actually, when I made the first painting, I was really sick. So it felt very unrefined and rough. I really struggled through it. So I think that, and it's a matter of perception, right? For me, this feels more successful because I've just decided to maybe refine certain forms in a way that I wasn't able to in the first one or something. So who knows whether what one is more successful or not. But so like, so I always start on the right-hand side for a large painting, and then I'll start moving towards the left, and then I'll jump over to the left. And then what I love about this process is that I am then, and then I have to find a way to connect these two seemingly, you know, disconnected sections, which I find really exciting. And this Fantasia means like a composition made of many different styles and improvisations. And it's obviously, you know, that Disney movie was I watched it every day as a child. So I love that, you know, a painting can be made in these sort of fragmentary, like non-linear way, but it can appear to have a very like linear, to be read in a really linear way. So there's just many different approaches to painting that I tried in this piece. Like under the yellow mound, I was playing around with different drying times with the paint. So I made one painting and then I let it dry for a few days and then scraped it off. And so some of the paint had already dried, and then I would paint another painting, let it partially dry, scrape that away, and then I did that a few more times. Whereas some of the sections are just like alla prima, that's it. Or some of it's been wiped away, like the hand has been wiped away right back down to the canvas.
So we've seen like several different examples of series. And so here's another one, Sacred Well from the Snakes and Ladders series. Can you get into like why working in a series is important to your work, or how do you determine that it's going to be a series?
Yeah. So I typically don't work in series. Okay. It's kind of a hard question because I think that a lot of things are changing for me right now in terms of how I'm, like I said, how I'm seeing that old works weren't finished. So what I'm realizing in my studio is that there are multiple bodies of work that are happening on different timelines. So which I'm now seeing is such a valuable way of working. So I have like these certain paintings that are kind of misfits, but they all go together, and then certain paintings that just require many, many years of layering. And then I'm seeing that there are multiple things happening at the same time, but that just take different time frames. The reason why I like working in series is because it gives the work a little bit of a direction. Like I work intuitively without a plan. It all begins and ends on the canvas or the panel. But if I have like a general overarching idea to begin with, then I just naturally sort of work within that or under that umbrella. And I like to leave it really open. Like the Snakes and Ladders idea came from, I just had this idea one day to look up the history of the board game Snakes and Ladders. Have you played it?
I mean, I have, but it's been like since I was a child, you know?
Yeah. I used to play it all the time.
Yeah.
Like, every day. And I had this, like, I was like, what is that? What is it? Where did it come from? What does it mean? So, it turns out that it originated in ancient India, and it was actually called the Game of Knowledge. And it was a way to teach Hindu morals and values to children. So
I had no idea.
Yeah, so the original game, like for people that don't know this game, there are snakes and ladders, and if you hit the tail of a snake, you have to slide down. If you hit the bottom of a ladder, you get to advance up. But in the original game, there were more snakes than ladders, which shows me that there's an inherent struggle and challenge in the wisdom to attain enlightenment, which is what they were teaching, but also in the painting process itself, in life. Like painting to me is only valuable insofar as it can teach us about living, and vice versa. And so I started, seeing similar patterns in the way that I make a painting. It's cyclical, non-linear. That's exactly what happens in the game of Snakes and Ladders. So there's this real emphasis on the non-linear nature of progress. So, for example, ideas are born out of what I'm reading or talking about, and then they just evolve into something usually that I couldn't have predicted.
So you're revisiting works that you thought were finished. So
yeah,
I guess now you're starting to reevaluate the way you look at a finished work. And
absolutely.
So how is that changing for you? And so my original question was really going to be like, how do you determine when a work is finished? But now you're going to reevaluate that. Is it a feeling? Is it intuitive? Is it planned?
So, okay. Philip Guston talks a lot about this recognition of an image. So like when you arrive at the final stage of a painting, there's this recognition in which the painting feels at once familiar and new. So it's like it's lived inside you for a long time, but it still surprises you. And that's kind of the feeling, that is the best way of describing it that I've ever come across. I also, you know, when I finish a painting, I know I finished it because it stops talking to me. Like, I feel like they communicate with you and they need and ask things of you. And as soon as it just stops talking, it becomes its own. It's almost like, you know, like you have a child and like at some point you're like, wow, like it's its own thing now. Like and also, you know, like when I look at a finished painting, my eye isn't drawn to a specific area or section. It just like hovers over the whole thing as one. So that's also like, if your eye's repeatedly drawn to a certain spot, like it's not done.
Yeah. And that's very much like an intuitive process for you and what is specific to your practice. So it's not necessarily something like me coming into your studio and telling you, oh, this work is not finished or this work is finished. Very much a personal interaction and discussion between you and the process.
Absolutely.
One other thing that I want to talk to you before we're finished is so you work in a variety of sizes. You have enormous size works, and you mentioned that you've been doing watercolors. And so why is it important for you to work in a variety of sizes and materials to show your ideas and themes?
Well, I always want to feel like a beginner in my process. I want the work to teach me something. I never want to assume too much control over the painting, and I want to have the opportunity for it to tell me what it needs. And so by alleviating some of that control, like the best way to do that for me is to switch things up as often as I can, so that my process on a certain size or with a certain material doesn't become too predictable and formulaic, because it can. And so that's why I tend to work on like a really small painting, and then immediately after I'll do that 15 by 9 foot painting.
Really throwing through a loop with that.
So, and same thing, like you can get comfortable working on a large scale or a small scale. So, and with one medium. And so, and I like seeing how my work translates in different materials. So, that's why, you know, working in an oil painting and then a drawing and then a watercolor, and, you know, something that I discover in the watercolor will then feed into the oil paintings. And so, I love that about that process.
Well, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been really lovely speaking with you. I have enjoyed getting to know your work. It's wonderful work, and I can't wait to see more.
Thank you so much, Tina. Yeah, this has been so wonderful.
Thank you.